me kind of start off by just saying, where the first principle in terms of how I relate to my fellow man, and that is the principle of self-ownership. And you'll see this all through my columns. That is, I believe the notion that we got from John Locke, and namely in his second treatise on government, that each of us owns ourselves. That is, I am my private property. You are your private property. You belong to yourself. Now, if you accept that as the initial premise or as the first principle, then what constitutes just rules of conduct are very easy. That is, why is murder wrong? Because it violates private property. Why is rape wrong or immoral? It violates private property. Why is theft wrong? It violates private property. So starting out from that initial premise, I think everything is fairly easy. Now, it gets a little more complex when we look at our everyday lives. When we ask what should be the role of government in a free society. Well, I think at least one role of government should not be that of violating private property. But however, that's the major function of the United States government, and governments almost everywhere. We, as Americans, we support government doing things that if a private person did the identical thing, we would all roundly condemn him as a low-down, despicable thief. You know, for example, I could see an elderly lady sleeping on a grate in downtown San Francisco over the winter, and she needs some dental care, she needs some food, she needs some housing. And I could walk up to David with a gun in my hand. I could say, David, give me your $200. And having gotten his $200, I go down, buy the lady some medical attention and some housing and some food. Would you find me guilty of a crime? Yes, I would. I would be guilty of theft, regardless of what I did with the money, because theft is defined as taking the rightful property of one person and giving it to another to whom it does not belong. Now, most Americans can buy that, but however, there's a problem. Now, the question is suppose the federal government, the agents of the United States Congress came up to me and said, Williams, you know that $200 you made last week that you had planned to buy 2 nice bottles of Lafite Rothschild Bordeaux wine with it? You will not do that with the money. We will go downtown and help the lady out. Now, I assert that there's no conceptual distinction between those two acts. That is, both acts involve taking the property of one American and giving it to another to whom it does not belong. Now, if you press me for a distinction, the only distinction I can find is that the first act, where I walked up to David, that is illegal theft. The second act is legal theft, but nonetheless theft, all the same. Now, we as moral people, we cannot allow legality alone to be our talisman, because many things in this world are or were legal, but clearly immoral. That is, slavery was legal. Did that make it moral? Apartheid in South Africa was legal. That didn't make it moral. Or the Nazi persecution of Jews, the Stalinist purges, the Maoist purges, they were all legal, but clearly immoral. That is, you and I as Americans, we need to ask the question, is there a moral basis for taking the property of one person and giving it to another to whom it does not belong? Now, it turns out that that is 3/4, or at least 2/3 of what the federal government spends money for. That is, if you look at the expenditures of our government, most of them consist of nothing more than legalized theft. Now, a lot of people will say to me, Well, Williams, you know, all these things you disagree with, they are a result of the fact that we have a democracy and it's majority rule. Well, first of all, I try to tell the person, well, the framers did not intend for it to be a democracy. It was to be a republic. But the more important thing is that just because we vote to steal from somebody doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it right at all. Now, I think that what we have to recognize, and the framers of the Constitution, our founders recognized this, is that in general, government is the enemy of the people. That is because the essence of government is coercion. Now, we do need some government, as Thomas Paine and others recognize, because men are not angels. We need to have government to stop you from taking my money or stop me from murdering you, so we do need government. But beyond that, that is the only role for government in a free society, is to stop one person from coercing another. That's the basic role of government in a free society. And the framers knew this well, and they sought to limit the government. And if you read the Constitution of the United States, it's very, very negative language. If you read it says, you find words like Congress shall not infringe, Congress shall not disparage, Congress shall not do, et cetera, et cetera. It's all negative language because the framers recognized that government was, in general, the enemy of the people. Now, you might say, well, what's some more evidence of government being the enemy of the people? Well, you know, by the way, you know, I will run into people, particularly lawyers, and they'll tell me, Williams, you shouldn't be so narrow in your interpretation of the Constitution. Because the Constitution is a living document, they tell me. Well, that's if you say that the Constitution is a living document, that is the same as saying we have no Constitution. That is, you know, how would you like to play me poker and the rules be living? I mean, maybe my two pair could beat your flush, depending on the circumstances. Now, going back to just more evidence of that government is, in general, the enemy of the people, is that if you look at, this century is closing. Matter of fact, by the way, the new century does not begin next year. But the century is closing. And I think that this will go down in history as the most brutal century in the history of mankind. And some numbers, if you go through a fellow's book, it's Professor Rummel at the University of Hawaii, and it's a book called Death by Government, an excellent book. He points out that in this century, 40 to 50 million people were killed during war. That's an awesome number. But 170 million people were murdered by their own governments.